10:44, calling the application review panel back to order. Seeing that all panel members are present, I'd like to welcome Mr. Neal Fornaciari. Fornaciari, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dawson to read the 5 standard questions.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Fornaciari. I'm going to read you 5 standard questions that the applicant review panel is posing to each of our applicants. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
First question. What skills and attributes should all commissioners possess? What skills or competencies should the commission possess collectively? Of the skills, attributes, and competencies that each commissioner should possess, which do you possess? In summary, how will you contribute to the success of the commission?
Well, thank you for this opportunity to meet with you and speak with you about this topic. My my experience on the grand jury, I made a whole list of things, but I'm just gonna hit a few high points here. I think first and foremost, the commissioners need to recognize the importance of what we're doing here, right? I mean, we're trying to ensure everyone has the chance to vote and be represented by people who represent their interests. So that's first and foremost. We have to remember that as commissioners. I think a willingness to listen and learn with an open mind from each other, from the staff, from the consultants, and from the public. I think there's been a lot of discussion about analytical skills, and I think all commissioners need to have a minimum set of basic analytical skills. I think, the commission as a whole needs to have a broad skill set. Some of the commissioners need to have, I think, exceptional analytical skills to truly understand what's going on here, but all of them have to have a basic set of analytical skills. And I think Commissioner Baraba made an excellent point, is the ability to synthesize information, not just analyze data, because you're getting a lot of data from a number of different data sets, quantitative data, but you're also getting qualitative data in feedback from the public, and you need to be able to synthesize that data in a way to make some decisions. I think that the panel members need to have comfort with ambiguity in the data, in the criteria, in the process, and ultimately be able to make decisions in the face of that ambiguity. And then finally, they have to have the ability to work as part of a team. What skills do I possess? Certainly deep analytical skills and the ability to synthesize information. Ability to present analytical data in a way that's understandable and actionable. I've done a lot of leadership coaching and mentoring, so active listening and seeking to understand. Team building, project management skills to keep things on track, and lifelong desire to learn and learn more about the state of California and the people. So what am I going to contribute to the success of the commission? I think, beyond the skills that I've talked about, I mean, it's a willingness to think beyond myself, to seek the best possible outcome that gives all Californians the ability to be represented by people who represent their interests.
Question 2. Work on the commission requires members of different political backgrounds to work together. Since the 2010 commission was selected and formed, the American political conversation has become increasingly polarized, whether in the press, on social media, and even in our own families. What characteristics do you possess, and what characteristics should your fellow commissioners possess that will protect against hyperpartisanship? What will you do to ensure that the work of the commission is not seen as polarized or hyperpartisan, and avoid perceptions of political bias and conflict?
Right. Well, I think we all recognize the hyper-partisanship going on. So first and foremost, keep the goal of the commission in mind. That's the most important thing. It's way more important than any one of us or our viewpoints. Be open-minded in a recognition that any individual doesn't know everything, but other perspectives are equally valid. I think the commissioners need to develop strong and trusting relationships, so that if something does come up, they can work through it. And for me, what would I do if I thought there was polarization on the commission? I try to address it in a non-accusatory way, but just ask questions to seek to clarify what my fellow commissioner meant by what they said. Again, in working to resolve conflicts using some of the tools that I've developed over the years.
Question 3. What is the greatest problem the commission could encounter, and what actions would you take to avoid or respond to this problem?
Yeah, so I actually picked 2. I kind of color outside the lines sometimes. I think the first thing, if I put on my leadership and mentoring hat, is the commission needs to spend time up front to become a cohesive team based on trust, mutual understanding, open-mindedness, and willingness to learn. They need to set a set of ground rules up front on how they'll work together. Because when the pressure's on and you have to make a decision, and there's conflict and you have to have a foundation of trust and understanding to fall back on in order to work through those things. The second thing is, I put on my project management hat, and I think up front they need to come to an agreement as best they can ahead of time what the approach they're going to take for making decisions about drawing lines. There's a lot of ambiguity there, but based on experience of past commissions in California and in other states, the feedback, the lessons learned from the past commission, do your best up front to kind of figure out where you're going to go. And so again, when it comes crunch time and the pressure's on to make some difficult decisions, you have a basis up front on which you're going to use to guide yourself to make those decisions. And also a decision on managing the vast amount of testimony and submissions that you're going to get. How are we going to handle that up front, and how are we going to use that information in our decision-making process?
Question 4. If you are selected, you will be one of 14 members of the commission, which is charged with working together to create maps of the new districts. Please describe a situation where you had to work collaboratively with others on a project to achieve a common goal. Tell us the goal of the project, what your role in the group was, and how the group worked through any conflicts that arose. What lessons would you take from this group experience to the commission if selected?
Right, so I was the foreperson for the 2018-19 civil grand jury in San Joaquin County. The goal of the grand jury is to conduct investigations in the function of county and local government, and write reports with findings and recommendations for rectifying those findings. It was a really interesting challenge in leadership. You have 19 volunteers or 18 other volunteers, and no real positional authority other than this notional assignment as chairperson. I don't provide feedback or raises, and so it was a bit of a challenge. There were some exceptionally strong personalities to work with and manage. So the approach I took was very early is to make space for conversation, to make sure everyone had space to be heard and felt heard. In the beginning when we started, we were trying to figure out what investigations to conduct. And you know, there's a lot of disagreement among the group, but I try to keep that, leave some space for folks to work through that, and allow, you know, a certain amount of tension among the group, and the group to become comfortable with it. Because I knew at the end, when we were making final decisions that we had to make about the reports, we had to be comfortable with tension. I mean, if there were more significant conflicts, I kind of handled them one-on-one, or pulled pairs of people together. And then, you know, there were some behavioral issues that I had to take folks aside and talk with them about. You know, this is the impact of your behavior on others, and you know, if you know, we need to work on that, and ideas of how to, you know, behave differently in the group to get along a little bit better with the group. You know, and again, what I learned, I kind of already shared that. You know, take time up front to build cohesion in the group, get to know each other beyond the resume. Conflict and disagreement are inevitable, but just get comfortable with that as a group. And then the final thing is begin writing much sooner than you think you should, because it takes a lot longer to write the reports.
Question 5. A considerable amount of the Commission's work will involve meeting with people from all over California who have come from very different backgrounds and a wide variety of perspectives. If you are selected as a commissioner, what skills and attributes will make you effective at interacting with people from different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives? What experiences have you had that will help you be effective at understanding and appreciating people and communities of different backgrounds and who have a variety of perspectives?
Okay, so I'll just share with you a little bit about my background beyond, you know, what was in the write-up, and I think that'll provide some clarity. So I grew up in a small town. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a secretary. You know, they had no college experience. Started as a shoeshine boy when I was 12 in a little barbershop in town to make a little money. I mowed lawns. High school, I worked at a pizza joint, you know, to make some money, buy a car, that kind of thing. After I got out of high school, I went off to Chico State. Kind of had a little too much fun, a little not enough time in class, and so that didn't work out. So I ended up going back. Work at the pizza parlor. When I was 22, I dove into the swimming pool and hit my head on the bottom, broke my neck. And spent some time in the hospital. And, you know, I realized at that time my career in the pizza business is probably over, and I need to do something different. So I went to the local community college in Livermore, spent a couple years there, and was able to transfer to Berkeley. I was able to take advantage of a pipeline program that they have for junior transfers from community colleges directly to University of California. I never would have had a chance to go to UC Berkeley without that program, but I got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering there. I got hired by Sandia National Labs, and they sent me back for my master's in mechanical engineering. And you know, so working at Sandia was interesting. The organization I worked in, there were about 100 or so staff members and managers. I was one of those staff members. About 98 had PhDs. 2 of us had masters. And, you know, I never worked in an organization. I never had experience growing up working with people at that level of education or working in an environment like that. But I quickly found out there was a very strong hierarchy. You had a PhD or you had a master's, and you know, I was treated quite differently than the folks with PhDs, and it, you know, I mean, it impacted me on my performance reviews and my salary. I loved the job, and I stayed there for 8 years, but it really, you know, being a second-class citizen there at work was really impacted my career at that point. So I moved on. My first management job, I was hired into a IT organization, and I had zero experience with IT. To further exacerbate the problem, I was hired over a few folks in the department who, had been in the department for a long time and were expecting to get promoted into the management position. So there was some distrust.
15 minutes.
Okay. Some distrust between me and those folks. And so what did I have to do to handle that, right? So I had to learn the technical part of the work to a point where I could be credible. I had to understand it and be credible. But I had to work with all the folks, to understand the work they're doing. But I especially had to work with those folks who had, resentment and distrust towards me, and work closely with them and figure out how to build bonds and relationships with those folks. And that was important. So later in my management career, I went into an operations organization. So at Sandia, the PhDs are up here, the master's level folks are down here. And the operations folks are really at the bottom of the barrel of the hierarchy. And in a lot of ways, they're treated very, very poorly. I was able to build strong working relationships with the folks in operations, who's really successful. But the way these folks were treated, and frankly, in some ways, I was treated too, even though I had come from the technical side, was really, really appalling. And that is what led me to jump in with both feet into the diversity and inclusion efforts that I talked about in my write-up. Just seeing how people were being just treated appallingly. And so what's my point of this story, right? I think there's a couple points I'm trying to make. I have some experience, being in situations where it's difficult, where you're in a lower rung of the hierarchy. Not in any way saying that I truly deeply understand what the minorities in this state are faced with, but at least my experiences can give me some empathy. I've also put together some tools and have been successful in building relationships with people at all levels in hierarchy, and I could bring those tools to bear in this endeavor to really try to understand what folks in the state are going through. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Well, the panel will each now have 20 minutes each to pose their questions. We'll begin with the chair, Ms. Dickinson.
Okay. So I just want to start looking at your career. You spent a large majority of your career with Sandia and National Laboratories, mostly in management positions in the last piece. Is that correct? Okay. And then you also served as the grand jury foreperson. What did you learn from those experiences that will assist you with the commission?
Well, I've talked about a lot of it already. Learning how to, work closely with a variety of different people. My 27 years at Sandia, I held about 10 different positions. So I worked in a number of different technical and managerial areas with lots and lots of different people coming from different places and different perspectives. And so that broad, diverse range of experiences there, helped me get to appreciate and value the differences in people. One of the things I mentioned in my write-up is me bugging my team with the saying that all of us are better than any one of us. And, I learned for sure that you really want that getting a set of diverse perspectives and opinions on any given topic makes the outcome better. and working hard to get that diverse set of perspectives is important. The grand jury was really a fun and interesting experience. You know, you have 19 people come together, really diverse set of people with very different perspectives and life experiences, and you know, it's just really interesting to hear those different perspectives and the different way that people look at the world. Very different than I do in a lot of cases, but it's you know, it enabled me to open my mind to different ways of looking at things and different, you know, outcomes that we might come to with regard to, you know, recommendations and findings in our reports.
Talking about those just different perspectives, you kind of talked about how you try to recognize and appreciate the differences in people's viewpoints and include those in decision-making processes. What did you do to ensure that you were getting the viewpoints of everyone, especially those who might not be comfortable providing it?
Yeah, so I made sure I left a lot of space for conversation. You know, I allowed silence I'm referring to the grand jury in particular, allowing silence. You know, in some cases, I would ask. You know, people weren't sharing if it appeared that they had something that they wanted to share but were a little reluctant. You know, I would ask. You know, if I felt people were well, none of the folks in the grand jury were too shy to speak up, but you know, at work, there, you know, in different environments, there are people that are reluctant to speak up. So, you know, just take them aside in one-on-one conversation and try to get their input. But, you know, open-ended questions, you know, I think seeking, you know, having a genuine interest in somebody and genuinely having them see you're genuine and you're seeking to understand goes a long way too.
As I mentioned before, you spent a lot of time in management leadership roles. How will you adjust to being a team member, not necessarily the leader?
Yeah, I don't think that'll be a tough adjustment for me. I think, you know, I've always, even though I was in a management and leadership role, I really took a very consensus approach to leadership. You know, I mean, it was rare when I was the final decision maker, you know, especially with my team of managers. You know, we would just sit around the table and talk about issues that came up and really work to try to come to a consensus solution. So you know, that's been my approach in management, tried to be my approach in management and in leading the grand jury. And excuse me. And so being part of a team, yeah, I don't think it's going to be a problem at all. Plus, you know, you know, being in a leadership role on the grand jury was also constraining in a way that it didn't enable me to dig in as deeply into the reports and the research as I would like to have done.
So you mentioned that you were involved in diversity and initiatives in your workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And you discussed attending a White Men as Full Diversity Partners workshop,
Mm-hmm.
and then securing funding so that you could provide some workshops where you were working.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn as a result of those workshops, and how will that information assist you in working with the commission in general, or the work of the commission in general, and with the group dynamics within the commission?
Yeah, so I thought that White Men and his Full Diversity Partners was really interesting. You know, the kind of gist of it is that you know, the dominant culture in the U.S. is a white male culture. You know, the country was founded and built mostly by white males, and so therefore white males don't recognize that there is a dominant culture that they are part of, and that they benefit from in ways that they don't understand, and that you know, other groups that aren't white males, you know, the bar is higher for them in a number of ways. And you know, for me to kind of recognize that, and recognize in a different way the challenges that women and minorities face, was really, really eye-opening. And so I pushed to bring that up to our site, because the organization is really white male dominated, as most engineering organizations are. And it was just fascinating to watch colleagues in these meetings, you know, start off, this is nonsense. I don't have any advantage in this culture, to, after a few days, come to a point where they realize, yeah, okay, I can see now maybe I do, and I can change my approach to working with people and my perspective. You know, I mean, it's especially profound when, you know, an African American that you work with shares a story of you know, being successful in buying a Hummer and having to sell that Hummer because he got pulled over time and time again, just because he was an African American guy. And then having another one of your colleagues tell a story about getting pulled over in his town that he lived in for 20 years because he's driving past cops who had pulled over another couple of African American guys, and they chased him down and pulled him over too, wondering what he's doing there. You know, and you know, I didn't have a recognition of those kinds of challenges that minorities and women face in, you know, I mean, I had an abstract, I guess, idea, but that made it so profoundly real for me and for the others. And so, you know, it really, really changed my perspective on that and my role in the culture of this country. So what would I bring to the table as the group? I mean, that perspective, and I could share and would share that perspective, and open-mindedness of other you know, cultures and groups. Does that answer your question?
You also talked about the outcome for the city of Tracy as a result of the 2002 redistricting. You referred to it as a gerrymandered mess.
Mm-hmm.
So in your opinion, was this issue addressed in the last redistricting?
Yeah, I read the report. Well, yes. Okay. I mean, yes, it was, because that district was drawn solely for our representative to get reelected. And you know what? It backfired on him, which is poetic justice, if you will. I mean, I think the last commission did a fine job. I mean, I don't really like the fact that they split up my county. And I don't really like the fact that they put my city with a city in Stanislaus County that I don't feel we have the connection with. You know, but I didn't go through those deliberations and in detail. You know, I just read a report and with some justifications as to why they did that. You know, I don't understand exactly why so I don't understand deeply why they did that. And I mean, I think they they maybe didn't get that quite right. I don't think their justification is quite right, but in the end, I mean, you got to make some hard decisions. This is a really, really challenging problem, and you have to make hard decisions. And sometimes, you have to do the best you can.
So in determining district lines, the commission's going to need to identify communities of interest. What methods do you think the commission should employ to identify those communities?
Well, I think that the public hearings that the last commission employed is a good way. Maybe there are some lessons learned that we can take from the last commission. I mean, maybe there's some, I don't know exactly the details of what they did, but maybe there's some direct outreach we can have to known community groups to begin to get some feedback early and identify what those communities of interest are. But I think ultimately it's get out there and boots on the ground and talk to the public and give the public a chance to provide their input.
How much time do I have?
6:50.
Thank you. What do you see as some of the factors that might drive the preferences individuals may have for representation within the different regions of California?
Well, I can, imagine the agricultural areas, I guess, so you said what are the factors? I would guess, for me in my area, it's transportation, right? How do we get bodies to the Bay Area? And I think that's a big issue throughout the Bay Area and throughout Southern California. I think industry, I think economic opportunities. I think education is a big factor, and access to education. I think, I mean, economics, work opportunities, things like that. I guess also, experience with the, experiences with the electoral process, right? That these communities of interest have had in the past, and their sense of their ability to be represented.
So, as you may know, the first 8 commissioners are selected by lottery, and then they are tasked with selecting the remaining 6 commissioners. What would you look for in selecting those 6?
Well, there's a set of demographics that we want to look at, that you all have been looking at. I think that those demographics are important. I think also, though, the first 8 have to keep in mind capabilities of the first 8 and what capability set do they need out of the 14. I think that's an important driver that can't be overlooked. I would go back and look at the interviews and look at the, I don't know if we get access to your notes, but look at the interviews and, read the thing. But I think, fair, try to be, 14 people can't represent all of the different demographics in the state, right? But be as fair as we can. I think to some extent also, capability to do the job is an important factor.
I don't have any additional questions, Mr. Belmar.
Okay, thank you for being here. Got a few questions for you. I'm going to start with a portion of your application and reading it only to lay the groundwork for those who have not read your application.
Okay.
You said, I spent my entire working career at Sandia National Laboratories. The first half of my career, I conducted research in several leading-edge technical areas. Some of the tools required for this research included expertise with spreadsheets, databases, mapping software, and computer programming. I want to ask you what your experience has been using mapping software in particular.
Okay. So in 2003, I was, let me see, it might help if I kind of, are you all familiar with Sandia at all and what Sandia does? Would it help? I think it would help.
It would
if I
help me,
explain.
yes. You
Okay.
want to back up to there?
Okay, so Sandia is a national laboratory. It's a government-owned laboratory. It's operated by a contractor, but the government owns it. And we do, or Sandia does, research and development in a wide range of national security related topics. The reason Sandia was founded and the main mission of Sandia is to provide systems engineering and maintenance of our nuclear weapons stockpile, the country's nuclear weapons stockpile. But in addition to that work, there's a lot of work going on in a broad range of national security areas. We have a huge energy program where we're looking at renewable energy and other energy security issues, cybersecurity, homeland security, lots of other kind of top secret security kind of stuff. But it's all the work is really focused on national security related issues, and it's not a business. We get funding from various entities, and we spend that funding. So we're funded to do specific types of work. So in 2003, not long after 9/11, there was a big concern in the country about radiological or nuclear terrorism. And I was working with the Department of Homeland Security on a project to look at that. And so I'll share a couple of examples. I think that'll help. One example is venue protection. So we were assigned, so say Super Bowl's coming up, and there's a concern of an attack with a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb is just basically an explosive that disperses nuclear material. So this is the threat. How do we protect this venue? So we used some new mapping software at the time called Keyhole Pro. It's now called Google Maps, but it had a lot more capability back then, or available at the time. And so you draw a circle around your venue, the radius of the distance you want to keep these bombs away, and then in detail, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, figure out how you are going to close off the neighborhood from anybody getting into the neighborhood, but deploy your detection systems to allow people to come into the venue. And it was super detailed down to the street level and neighborhood level on how we were going to develop strategies on blocking off those neighborhoods and preventing attack. The second thing that we did was every Thursday, the Office of the Vice President would meet with our sponsor from Department of Homeland Security and come up with a scenario. Okay, this week, what if we give all of the cops in New York City a little radiation detector and then deploy more sophisticated detectors around the city to respond if one of the small detectors goes off. So what would that look like? How would you deploy these detectors, right? So we use this mapping software to look at where are the fire stations, where are the police stations, where are the areas that we could deploy the most sophisticated detectors and get the kind of response that we needed. It was all about mapping, all about distances, all about neighborhoods, and all about trade-offs, right? So, and this is where I think the similarity is, right? You're doing a systematic study of trade-offs of, how many of these things are we going to deploy? What are the costs? It's different variables than we're doing now, but it's really neighborhood by neighborhood, looking at the city and the characteristics of the city, and how would we make decisions based on the constraints that we have.
Okay, thank you. So I want to return to your work at Sandia and also your time at jury foreman. So in your essay in regards to your ability to be impartial, you bring up three things. One is your time as a grand jury foreman. I think you've already talked about that. But the other two were your time as a researcher at Sandia and then your time as a manager. So I'd like you to talk first about how does your time as a researcher and the things that you did in that role show that you have an ability to be impartial?
I mean, so in order to be successful at doing research, I mean, you have to be impartial. You conduct experiments. I mean, you have an idea about how these experiments might turn out, but you look at the results, and the results guide you as to what's going on, and the results are not always what you think they're going to be, right? The feedback, the input you're getting is not always what you expect. So you have to be open-minded enough to kind of rethink your initial assumptions on what is the physics and happening in the problem that we're looking at. And so, as a researcher, I had to do that, quite a lot. You'd be surprised how much you're surprised in the results and the outcome and the feedback you're getting. So as a manager, the example I gave was, there were times when, so I was a manager of managers at that time, right? And so the staff didn't feel that the performance review or the feedback that they were getting from their manager was accurate, and I had to be the mediator. And I really took the effort to be impartial, to hear both sides of the story, and take that in and come back with my decision, based on the input, and I took great pains to ensure that both sides felt they were heard. I wasn't always able to side with the employee or side with the manager, but both sides were heard, and that I explained and they could understand what the decision that I came to, why I came to that decision, based on that input.
All right, thank you. So you answered one of my questions about how you went from Sandia and they paid for you and directed you or offered the opportunity to get your master's from UC Berkeley.
Right.
But I also saw that you later went on to get an MBA from UC Berkeley. How did that come about, and how were you able to manage doing that while at the same time working at Sandia?
Yeah, it was kind of insane. When I was promoted to senior manager, I was promoted into an operations organization that was responsible for budget and finance and project management, business development, a lot of different areas, all in business related. And we require the staff, even the operations staff in those areas, to have master's degrees, to have MBAs. I felt like, hey, if we require them to have an MBA, I better have an MBA too. I mean, it's kind of hypocritical for me to not. Plus, I felt it would help me understand what we're doing better. So Sandia has a program to send folks to get advanced degrees. They don't often like to send people to business school. They really like to send people to engineering school. And so it was a little bit of a challenge working the system to get them to support that. But they did, and I got an executive MBA from Berkeley. So I went all day. It was all day Thursday, all day Friday, and all day Saturday, every 3 weeks. And so, it was a challenge. It was a lot of work. I mean, I was basically going to school full time and working full time, but I have a lovely, supportive wife here that really helped me get through it.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Coe?
Good morning, Mr. Fornaciari. Thank you for being here. Through your testimony are some of the questions my colleagues have asked. A lot of my questions that I had prepared for you have already been answered, such as the plight of the panelist that goes last here. But I wanted to go back to your work on the grand jury as the foreperson. Was that role as foreperson something that you sought out, or how did that come about, your falling into that role?
Yeah, no. We all showed up the day that the names were going to be drawn, and I was pulled back to the judge's chambers, and he asked, if you get picked, would you be willing to be foreperson? He didn't tell me why. He didn't, I didn't ask to be. I no way asked to be foreperson. He just, I think, what he saw was my consensus approach to leadership, and felt that I would have a good approach to becoming foreperson.
In some of the questions, I think Mr. Belknap was asking about how your time at the laboratory and as a researcher specifically showed an ability to be impartial. Is there a specific example of a time that you think would best illustrate the things you've already discussed at a more high level?
Wow, that was a while ago. As a researcher. Yeah, I mean, nothing specific is coming to mind. I'll just say, a lot of our job as a researcher is peer review, and reviewing peers' papers or peers' work and providing feedback. And when you're doing that, you really have to kind of step back and sort of understand where they're coming from and what they're doing. You have to be, you want to provide, some critical feedback, but try not to do it in a critical way, right? But provide feedback. And we had to do that a lot. And in order to be effective, I think you have to really be kind of be impartial, try to understand where that researcher was coming from and what they were doing, and evaluate, based on, your experience, but also based on the scientific data, whether or not what their conclusions were valid. Sorry, it's not the best example, but it's the best I can think of right now.
Okay. I'm gonna ask another question for another example, hopefully.
Okay.
This one's a little easier. You spoke in question 1 about what you could bring to the commission, and one thing you said was a willingness to think beyond yourself. And I'm wondering if you could illustrate that for us with an example, potentially.
Yep. So let's see. I had a department that had sort of two sides to the department. One side was folks who were doing computer modeling on physical phenomena. One side, folks were doing engineering work, in the lab, developing, designing, testing, that kind of thing. And the group had gotten pretty big. It was about 12 on each side of the group. It was getting a little tough for me to manage both sides. The one side with the modeling was flush with money. Bunch of money, lots of money. The other side, really tough to keep these guys employed. When the department was together, it was easy because I had so much money over here, I could put these folks on this work if they didn't have engineering work. But it got to the point where I felt we really needed to split the group. And I had a choice. Which side do I want to go on? And I felt that, getting someone else to manage the modeling group was the better answer because, there were other folks who could manage that group who had more experience. I felt the engineering group was the right group for me to manage because I had a deep understanding of what they were doing, and I saw some opportunities for that group to do better, but it was hard. I mean, that was the hardest job I ever had, and I knew it was going to be the hardest job I ever had, but I thought it was the right thing for the organization as a whole and for that group in particular for me to take that job.
So you knew it was going to be a difficult experience before you chose to take
Oh,
that role?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, because I had to spend most of my time, trying to drum up work for the folks in that group, and that meant, working with my colleagues within Sandia, getting on the road and traveling back to Washington to work to try to develop new programs, travel around the country to other universities and businesses and try to work in developing funding. So all the funding for Sandia comes in externally. It's not like a business that has internal discretionary funding. So all the programs are coming in from the outside, and developing programs is a ton of work. And I knew that was what the job was going to be, but I thought that was the right answer for the company. I mean, so at Sandia, it sounds a little corny, but we had a saying we used to make decisions, and it was country, Sandia, self. And that was the approach we used to make decisions. Is the best thing for the country? Is it the best thing for Sandia? And last, is it the best thing for the individual?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to kind of extend a question that Ms. Dickinson asked earlier. When she asked about your experience working with the diversity and inclusion program with your, it was at Sandia, right, I believe. In your response to that, you discussed gaining a deep understanding of societal privileges that certain people or groups of people may or may not have. From that perspective, from what you learned there, how do you think those different groups that may or may not have different levels of that privilege, how do you think that affects those groups' desires for political representation?
Well, I think that, the groups that feel underrepresented, that feel like that they don't get the voice that they deserve, I feel like they deserve that, right? And that's, to me, that's a big part of, and an important part of this process, is to hear those voices and to understand their perspectives and their feelings, and in a historical context of what these groups feel like they've been going through and how they've been disenfranchised, and then do, number one, make sure they feel heard. Number two, figure out what we can do as a commission to give them the voice. It's a tough problem. It's not going to work out for everyone. Not everyone's going to get what they want, but at least folks will have been heard or feel heard and have their concerns and considerations taken into account.
Thank you. One final question. In your role as commissioner, if you were selected, which aspects of that role do you think that you would enjoy the most or bring the most value to the group? And conversely, which aspects of that do you think you might perhaps struggle with a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin. I think for me, the opportunity to learn about more about California, more about the people of California, more about their concerns. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm really excited about that opportunity to get to know more about California and learning. The thing I have to remember is, I imagine in public testimony that testimony can get a bit redundant and get a bit long, and I just have to remember to be patient and remember that everyone deserves to have a say and to have their voice and be heard. So I think that's where I'd be.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Mr. Dawson?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dickinson. I have a couple of follow-up questions. A couple of them have to do with things that you'd said in your essay. And let me see. Oh, on question 3, about demonstrating an appreciation for California's diverse demographics and geography. You said that in your work, you would say to your management team, all of us are better than any one of us. What did you mean by that?
I mean that, it's important to get, for my managers, it was important for them to seek out input from all of their staff and get perspectives. A part of that was also, a push to get them to think and work really hard to think about diversity when they're hiring. Because again, I believe that a group of diverse perspectives generates a better outcome than a few individuals doing the same thing that they've always done.
So would it be fair to say that this has multiple aspects? One is getting input from the whole team,
Mm-hmm.
but then does it also inform your perspective on who should be on the team?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, yeah. I mean, in a context like this, right?
Mhm.
Right. We need a team with diverse perspectives and diverse. So, for example, I'll give you a specific example that's on my mind. I have zero experience working with community groups. I just haven't done that. But this commission needs folks who have experience doing that, to have credibility to have, coming in credibility with community groups. I mean, I would work to gain credibility with groups by, really earnestly seeking to understand and learn about their concerns. But I think there's a diverse set of requirements for skills within the commission.
I'm going to return to something that you'd said about, and I believe this was this group at Sandia, where members of the dominant culture don't recognize that they benefit from the dominant culture. It seems to me that's something, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
What don't you know? And how would that be relevant?
Well, I mean,
in this context?
In this context, I mean, I don't know what people of color have gone through in the context of voting. No, I mean, I guess I have a notion. I mean, I can guess, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I don't know about California. It was interesting to me to read the report that, the final report that, there were some community, the African American community in LA did not want a single focused district, right? They had developed coalitions and were effective in getting their representation through coalitions. So they didn't want a single district, whereas other communities wanted it. I would never have guessed that, I mean, but and then there was something about in the North State there were Sikh communities and other communities in agriculture that wanted to be all together. Well, I've no idea, you know, but that's that's part of this opportunity, why this opportunity is so interesting, the opportunity to learn and understand more about the state and the people of the state.
About 5 minutes. I do have one more thing that you'd said in your response to the first standard question, that it is important to be comfortable with ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand on that? What did you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the criteria here that we use, there's the decennial census, there's, statements of voter registration. These are all databases, consensus geography, right? These are kind of databases, but there's uncertainty in those databases, right? And we have to recognize that there's uncertainty and ambiguity in those databases. And then you respect for communities, or respect for neighborhoods, respect for communities of interest. That's all about testimony, and that, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity in that testimony, and how do you work through that ambiguity to come to a decision? It's definitely going to be a challenge to work through that ambiguity, and some people just aren't comfortable with that and making a decision in the face of that ambiguity, but you have to do that. So, on the grand jury, for instance, we get all this testimony. Somebody says this person's a jerk. Someone says this person's not a jerk. We got to figure out what the truth is, and sometimes you can't. And so you can't include that in your ultimate deliberation. So you have to be able to work through that.
I don't have anything further.
I don't have any follow-up questions, Mr. Belknap.
I don't either.
Mr. Hall?
I have one. I want to springboard off of the last question Mr. Dawson asked regarding decision-making in the face of ambiguity. I understand a lot of what you're saying. I think you're right. I think there's very few situations you're ever going to go into it and have 100% of the information to be able to make the best informed decision. There's always going to be blind spots somewhere. Knowing that you're probably going to have to make decisions in the face of ambiguity, like you've mentioned, I'm curious if you have any strategies for making decisions with those with some level of ambiguity. Any strategies that the commission could follow to make good decisions with some ambiguity being present.
Right. So if you go back to my thoughts about what the committee needs to do up front, right? One of those things is develop a set of criteria to the best that they can up front, and understand what, come to some agreement where they can on that criteria, and understand there's going to be some ambiguity or some uncertainty in the outcome. But having gone through that exercise up front and work through it and understand where the trade space may be and understand where they're going to have to do some give and take, then when it comes to the end, when you have to make decisions, you have a basis that you've already agreed to for making those decisions.
I want to tell you what I think I heard. I want to see that and make sure I'm understanding.
Okay.
So, with ambiguity present, you're making decisions. The people making those decisions are going to have some level of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're saying is, and this is what I want to confirm, is that if you have discussions up front about how to put together a general decision-making matrix or process,
Mm-hmm.
it removes some of that discomfort, and some of the negative aspects that can come with discomfort in terms of decision making. If we remove some of that, we remove some of the that discomfort, we might have the ability to make better decisions, more streamlined decisions, and more consistent decisions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and it also will help us understand the impact of decisions that we're making, or if we want to try to change a criteria. I know that the last commission changed their percentages, for instance, a number of times as they went through. But as you change those things, you may be impacting one of the other criteria. So if you spend some time up front thinking those sorts of things through, maybe doing some scenario planning or that kind of thing, then you can have a better understanding of what the impact of the decisions you're making are. I guess, I mean, if that's any clear, I'm not sure that's any clearer, but
I think so.
just for your response, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Madam Chair, how much time do we have?
How much time?
24 minutes, 50 seconds.
Do you have a follow-up
I do.
question?
So it's taken me a while to formulate this, so that's why I skipped. So as I've read your application and heard you today, I was struck by how the injury that you sustained at 22 changed your life. You said you were planning to go work in the pizza parlor, and then you said, well, that's not going to work out. And then what you did with it to go to UC Berkeley to get your bachelor's and then 2 masters, I could see that was an inflection point in your life. How do you feel the injuries you sustained at 22 changed you as a person? And if you would address whether you feel like that change would make you a better commissioner?
Well, I mean, first of all, I recognized I had to get my act together, to make something of my life. I'll just, that's a big part of it. I'd always wanted to be an engineer, and so I decided I really want to focus on going down that road. I knew, my life, clearly there's been challenges in my life, right? When I first, after I first got hurt, so it was 30-something years ago, right? Access wasn't available that is now. My wife and I would call a restaurant, are you wheelchair accessible? Sure, we only have 3 steps in the front, kind of thing. And so, I had to go through a lot of, kind of access-related challenges. And then, there's challenges, people, and their reaction to me. A lot of times kids will, come up and want to find out what the deal is, and parents will freak out. It's, I understand. It's a little tough to take sometimes, but I understand. So, I think I've, to some extent, I've gone through some of the things that some of the folks, that have been underrepresented are going through. So I think it gives me a basis for empathy and understanding.
Thank you.
Mr. Dawson?
Yeah, we have roughly 22 minutes. If you'd like to make a closing statement to the panel.
Oh, 22 minutes, awesome. No, I want to make a comment. You guys asked a question to the other engineer the other day that you didn't ask me, and that's if I'd be comfortable with odd-shaped districts. And I want to answer that question because I think it's important. And the answer is yes. I watched the training that you all went through, and the guy showed the headphone-shaped district or something in Chicago to represent the Hispanic community, and they were struggling with a group of the African American community surrounded by the Hispanic community. And in my mind, that district is elegant, and it shows a deep understanding of the rules and the underlying intent of what we're trying to do here. And it's beautiful and thoughtful, and it's really higher level thinking to come up with an answer like that. I think in the line drawing exercise that was presented to you, the woman was talking about Santa Clara County and, coming up with different scenarios for either splitting this fictitious Silicon Valley community of interest or not. And my question that came in my mind is, well, do they want to be split? Would they benefit by being split? We should ask them that question, because maybe having 2 representatives for the Silicon Valley district is better than 1. And then she talked about the prawn-shaped district that they had drawn. And again, another, not intuitively obvious outcome, but there was a meaning and a purpose behind it that I thought was valid and really thoughtful. So I just want to say that. And then finally, let's see, I want to thank you for all your hard work. I mean, this is just an amazing process that you guys are going through. It's really, really difficult and challenging, and you are doing a fabulous job. And thank you for considering me for this role.
Thank you. So our next interview is at 1:15. So we're going to recess now until 1:14.